My father built an empire during the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Defense contracts, supply chains, logistics. Peterson Defense Solutions became one of the largest private military contractors in the country. Growing up, I was proud of him. He was building something that mattered, something that kept soldiers safe. Then I became one of those soldiers. And 3 weeks ago, I found out exactly what my father was building his empire on. When I tell you what I discovered, you'll understand why I haven't spoken to him since. Why I can't. Why some of my brothers from 2nd Platoon will never get the chance to. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start at the beginning. I enlisted in the Army right out of college in 2019. My father wasn't happy about it. We had this massive argument in his office, the one with the panoramic windows overlooking downtown Denver, the mahogany desk that cost more than most people's cars. "You have an MBA from Stanford," he said, not even looking up from his computer. "You could run an entire division of this company. Instead, you want to play soldier?" "It's not playing," I told him. "Someone has to serve." He finally looked at me then. Something flickered across his face. I couldn't read it at the time. "You have no idea what you're doing, Marcus. No idea what war actually costs." "Then I'll learn." He leaned back in his chair, studying me like I was a balance sheet that wasn't adding up. "Yes," he said quietly. "I suppose you will." That was May 2019. By January 2020, I was at Fort Benning for infantry training. By September 2021, I was with Bravo Company, 2nd Battalion, 87th Infantry Regiment, preparing for deployment to eastern Syria. My father sent care packages, called once a month, asked detailed questions about our equipment, our deployment schedule, which routes we'd be taking. I thought he was just being a concerned dad, maybe overcompensating for not supporting my decision at first. I was an idiot. We deployed to Syria in November 2021. Our mission was to support Kurdish forces in maintaining stability in the region, prevent ISIS from regrouping. Mostly we ran patrols, secured checkpoints, tried not to get hit by the occasional mortar round that someone thought would make a difference. The gear issues started almost immediately. First it was Sergeant Chen's rifle. The firing pin broke during a patrol, just snapped clean in half while he was doing a routine chamber check. Our armorer looked at it like he'd never seen anything like it before. "Metal fatigue," he said, turning the pieces over in his hands. "But these rifles are only 2 years old. Shouldn't happen." We wrote it up, got Chen a replacement, moved on. 3 weeks later, Private Martinez's body armor failed during a training exercise. Not failed like it got penetrated, we weren't taking fire. Failed like the ballistic plates just cracked straight down the middle. He was doing a standard patrol movement, took a knee behind some cover, and felt something snap. When we pulled the plates out, they'd split like cheap ceramic tiles. "Manufacturing defect," Lieutenant Kowalski said, examining the pieces. "Bad batch, probably. Turn it in, we'll get new plates." We did. We got replacements. We kept training. Then it was the water purification tablets. Half of them didn't work, left Private Wilson puking his guts out for 3 days. The radio batteries that died after 4 hours instead of the rated 48, the parachute cord that snapped under standard load during a rope exercise, sending Corporal Davis to the medic with a twisted ankle. Little things, annoying things, things that felt like bad luck or sloppy supply chain management. We complained, we filed reports, we did what we were supposed to do. And the defective equipment kept coming. It was February 2022 when Private First Class Jake Morrison didn't make it back from patrol. We'd been running a routine security check on one of the villages in our sector. Standard stuff, show the flag, talk to locals, make sure nobody was building bombs in their basement. Morrison was our youngest, 20 years old, always smiling, always talking about the fishing boat he was going to buy when he got home to Maine. He was on point when his rifle jammed. We'd been getting small arms fire from a building to our east, nothing serious, just someone taking pot shots to remind us they didn't want us there. Standard procedure is to return fire, suppress the threat, fall back if needed. Morrison's M4 jammed on the second round. He tried to clear it. We all saw him, working the charging handle like we'd been trained 1,000 times, but the casing was stuck, completely lodged in the chamber, and the extractor had broken clean off. He was still trying to clear it when the round hit him. He went down hard. We got to him within seconds. Sergeant Chen was applying pressure to the wound before I even finished processing what happened. But it was bad. The field medic did everything he could, but some things you can't fix with a trauma kit and determination. Morrison didn't make it to the medvac. 20 years old, fishing boat he'd never buy, father who'd have to bury his only son. All because his rifle failed at the exact moment he needed it most.
We were devastated, angry, looking for someone to blame besides the insurgent who'd pulled the trigger. The investigation was thorough, I'll give them that. They examined Morrison's rifle, interviewed everyone who'd been there, reconstructed the whole engagement. The conclusion came back 2 weeks later. Mechanical failure due to a defective extractor spring combined with improper chamber tolerance. Was it maintenance? Lieutenant Kowalski asked the investigating officer. No, sir. Your unit's maintenance records are excellent. This was a manufacturing defect. The parts were out of spec when they left the factory. How does that happen? I asked. How does a rifle leave the factory with out-of-spec parts? The officer just shook his head. That's above my pay grade, Sergeant Peterson. Could be poor quality control, could be cost-cutting measures, could be simple human error. Happens more than you'd think, unfortunately. But it wasn't supposed to happen. These were supposed to be the best weapons in the world, made to the highest standards, tested and retested before they ever reached our hands. Instead, Morrison was gone because someone, somewhere, hadn't done their job right. We got new rifles, better ones, supposedly, from a different contract, different manufacturer. The Army took care of its own, eventually, just not fast enough for Jake Morrison. Before I tell you what happened over the next few months, if you're hooked on this story, hit that like button and subscribe. There are dozens more voices like mine here. And drop a comment with your country. I'm curious where all of you are listening from. The equipment failures continued. Not constantly, not every piece of gear, but enough that we started to notice a pattern. It was always the same contractor, Peterson Defense Solutions, my father's company. I didn't make the connection at first. Why would I? PDS supplied equipment to half the military. The name was everywhere. It would be like noticing that all the paper in the Army came from the same manufacturer. Technically true, but meaningless. But Sergeant Chen noticed. Chen noticed everything. Hey, Peterson, he said one morning while we were cleaning weapons. Your old man's company. They do rifles? They do everything, I said. Logistics mostly. They contract with manufacturers, handle distribution, manage the supply chain. Why? He held up a parts bag, the kind that comes with replacement components. Small white letters in the corner. PDS. Peterson Defense Solutions. Because every piece of defective shit we've gotten has come from his company. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. There's got to be dozens of contractors, hundreds. Sure, but check your gear, check everything. Look at the labels, the packaging, the supply documentation. I did. He was right. Every single failure we'd had, from Chen's broken firing pin to Morrison's jammed rifle to Martinez's cracked body armor, all of it had come through Peterson Defense Solutions. All of it had come from my father's company. I tried to tell myself it was coincidence. PDS was huge, supplied equipment to thousands of soldiers across multiple theaters. Of course there would be failures. No system was perfect. The law of averages meant that some of it would be defective. But the numbers did not up. I started asking around, quietly at first, then more persistently. Other units, other platoons. What kind of equipment failures were they experiencing? Who was their contractor? 3rd Platoon, deployed in the same region, minimal failures. Their primary contractor was Sentinel Systems. Alpha Company, operating out of the same forward base, scattered issues, nothing systematic. They used a mix of contractors, mostly Blackstone Defense. Charlie Company, same battalion as us, they had PDS as their primary contractor. Their failure rate looked like ours, and they'd lost 2 soldiers in the past 4 months to equipment malfunctions. I didn't want to believe it. You have to understand that. My father had built this company from nothing. He'd spent 30 years establishing relationships, maintaining quality standards, earning the trust of the military. The idea that he'd let defective equipment slip through, that he'd be careless with soldiers' lives, it didn't fit with the man I knew. But I couldn't ignore what I was seeing. I called him, April 2022, using the sat phone during a rare moment of downtime. "Marcus," he sounded genuinely happy to hear from you. "How are you holding up? Getting enough to eat?" "We're fine, Dad. Listen, I need to ask you something about PDS." A pause. Brief, barely noticeable. "What about it?" "We've been having equipment issues, a lot of them, and they all trace back to your company." Equipment issues are inevitable in any large-scale operation. We supply millions of dollars worth of gear across multiple combat zones. Some failures are statistically unavoidable. "Dad, we've had a soldier go down because of a defective rifle." Another pause, longer this time. "I'm sorry to hear that, truly. But Marcus, you need to understand the scale of what we do. We coordinate with 53 different manufacturers across 8 countries. We handle quality control as best we can, but we can't catch everything. It's the nature of the business. But the failure rate is within acceptable parameters for the DoD. I know this is personal for you. I know it's frightening when you're the one in the field, but the military has strict standards, and we meet them every single time." He sounded so certain, so reasonable. I wanted to believe him. "Just check on it, okay? Make sure everything's being done right." "Of course," he said. "I'll personally review our QC protocols. You focus on staying safe. That's what matters." We talked for a few more minutes about nothing important. He asked about my unit, about our deployment schedule, about when we'd be rotating back. I told him probably September, maybe October if they extended us. "I'll be there when you get home," he said. "We'll have dinner. Celebrate you making it through." "Sure, Dad. That sounds good." I hung up, feeling slightly better. He'd look into it. He'd fix whatever was wrong. That's what he did. He fixed problems. It never occurred to me that he might be the problem. Now here's where everything changed. But real quick, if you're invested in how this ends, I'd genuinely appreciate a subscription. More soldier stories drop daily. Comment your country below. Always amazes me how far these reach. We rotated home in October 2022. I spent 2 weeks leave with my family in Colorado, trying to decompress. My father threw a welcome home party. Nothing huge, just family and close friends. He gave a speech about sacrifice and service. He seemed proud. I went back to Fort Riley in Kansas. My unit stood down, began training for the next deployment cycle. Everything returned to normal. Except I couldn't stop thinking about the equipment failures. I filed formal reports through my chain of command, detailed documentation of every failure, every incident, every near miss. I cross-referenced them with other units, showed the pattern. I made it clear that this wasn't about my father. This was about soldiers' lives. The reports went up the chain. I got acknowledgments, promises of investigation, assurances that the matter was being taken seriously. Nothing changed. PDS kept their contracts. The Army kept using their equipment, and soldiers kept finding out their gear wasn't as reliable as it should be. So I started digging on my own. The paper trail was buried, but it was there if you knew where to look. I spent 6 months going through public contract records, FOIA requests, financial disclosures. I wasn't trying to destroy my father's company. I just wanted to understand what was happening, why the quality control was failing, where in the supply chain things were going wrong. What I found was worse than I had imagined. Peterson Defense Solutions had been awarded contracts worth over $800 million during 2020 to 2022. The majority of these contracts came with something called performance incentives. Basically, if PDS delivered equipment under budget, they kept a percentage of the savings as profit. Standard practice, nothing wrong with that. Except PDS had consistently delivered 15 to 20% under budget across nearly every contract. That's not normal. That's not how defense contracting works. These budgets are carefully calculated. You might save 2–3% through efficient operations, maybe 5% if you're exceptional. 15 to 20% meant corners were being cut somewhere. I dug deeper.
The manufacturers PDS contracted with were all legitimate, or at least they had been. But in 2020, right before the major contract awards, PDS had renegotiated terms with most of them. Lower prices per unit, faster delivery schedules, reduced testing requirements. The manufacturers pushed back. Some had refused outright. Those manufacturers lost their contracts with PDS. The ones who agreed to the new terms got more business than ever. And the quality of their output dropped. Not catastrophically, not obviously, just slightly. Tolerances a little wider, materials a little cheaper, testing a little less rigorous. Individually, each change was defensible. Collectively, they created a systematic increase in failure rates. My father had to know. He'd built his entire career on understanding supply chain quality. There was no way he didn't see what was happening. But why? PDS was already profitable. My father was already wealthy. Why risk soldiers' lives for an extra few percentage points of margin? I needed to talk to him face to face. I flew to Denver in March 2023 without telling him I was coming. Showed up at the PDS headquarters building, walked past security like I belonged there, which technically I did. My father had always told me I'd have a job waiting whenever I wanted it. His assistant tried to stop me at his office door. "Mr. Peterson is in a meeting. I'm his son. He'll see me." I walked in. He was alone, actually, standing at those panoramic windows looking out at the Rocky Mountains in the distance. He didn't turn around when I entered. "I wondered when you'd come," he said. That stopped me. "You knew?" "You've been filing FOIA requests for 6 months, Marcus. You've been talking to investigators, journalists, anyone who listened. Of course I knew." He finally turned to face me. He looked older than I remembered. Tired. "So it's true. The defective equipment, the cost-cutting, all of it." "It's more complicated than that. Morrison is gone because his rifle failed. Chen almost didn't make it back because his body armor was substandard. How is that complicated?" My father walked to his desk, opened a drawer, pulled out a thick folder. He held it out to me. "I need to tell you what happened next, but first, if this story's got you, show some love with a like and subscribe. I read every comment, especially love seeing where you're all from around the world." I took the folder. Inside were deployment orders, equipment manifests, supply requisitions. All for Bravo Company, 2nd Battalion, 87th Infantry Regiment. My unit. Specifically marked for delivery to my unit. "I don't understand," I said, but even as I spoke, pieces were clicking into place. The way he'd asked about our deployment schedule, about our routes, about our specific equipment needs. "You knew," I whispered. "You knew the equipment was defective, and you sent it to my unit anyway." "I sent it to your unit specifically," he said quietly. The room tilted. I grabbed the edge of his desk to steady myself. "Why?" He moved to the window again, hands clasped behind his back. The pose of a general addressing troops. The pose of a man about to justify the unjustifiable. "You enlisted because you wanted to understand sacrifice," he said. "You wanted to understand what war costs. Do you remember telling me that?" "That doesn't—" "You were naive, Marcus. Idealistic. You thought serving your country meant putting on a uniform and following orders. You had no idea what war actually is. So you tried to, what? Teach me a lesson?" "I tried to show you the truth." He turned back to face me. "War isn't about valor and honor. It's about money. It's about contracts and profit margins and who can deliver what for the lowest cost. Every soldier's life has a price tag. Every piece of equipment has an acceptable failure rate. The military knows this. The politicians know this. Everyone knows this, except the young men who volunteered to do the fighting." "Morrison didn't need to go down," I said, my voice shaking. "You could have sent better equipment. You could have—"
I could have protected you from reality, yes. I could have made sure your unit got the premium gear while other units got the cost-effective alternatives. I could have let you come home thinking that service and sacrifice actually mean something, but then you would have learned nothing. The folder fell from my hands, papers scattered across the expensive carpet. You're insane! I'm honest, and now so are you. You know exactly what your service was worth. You know who profits from war and who pays for it. You learned the lesson, Marcus. That was the point. I left his office. I don't remember the elevator ride down, or the walk through the lobby, or getting to my car. The next thing I clearly remember is sitting in a parking lot 3 blocks away, shaking so hard I couldn't get the key in the ignition. My father had deliberately sent defective equipment to my unit. He'd known soldiers would likely get hurt. He'd done it anyway because he wanted to teach me some twisted lesson about the nature of war and capitalism. Morrison was 20 years old. He'd never see his fishing boat. His father would never stop grieving. His mother would wake up every morning knowing her son was gone. And it was a lesson, a teaching moment, a way to make sure his idealistic son understood how the world really worked. I wanted to throw up. I wanted to scream. I wanted to go back up to that office but what could I do? Who would believe me? My father had covered his tracks carefully. The contracts were legal. The equipment met minimum DoD standards. Barely, but technically. The failures were within statistically acceptable ranges. On paper, Peterson Defense Solutions had done nothing wrong, except deliberately distribute lower-quality equipment to specific units while knowing it would likely result in casualties. Except use those casualties as an educational tool for his son. Except treat soldiers' lives as objects in a game designed to teach someone a lesson. I sat in that parking lot for 2 hours trying to figure out what to do. I went to the investigators first, the ones who'd been looking into equipment failures, who'd taken my report seriously. I told them everything, about the folder, about my father's confession, about the deliberate targeting of my unit. They listened, they took notes, they promised to follow up. 3 weeks later, I got a call. The investigation was being closed. Insufficient evidence of criminal wrongdoing. The equipment met DoD standards. The failure rates, while tragic, weren't outside normal parameters. My father's statements, even if true, didn't constitute a prosecutable offense. He admitted it, I said to the investigator. He told me he made business decisions about equipment distribution. That's not illegal. Unless you have recordings or written evidence of conspiracy to commit fraud or cause harm, there's nothing we can prosecute. So he just gets away with it? I'm sorry, Sergeant Peterson. Sometimes the system doesn't work the way we want it to. I went to journalists next, gave them everything I had. They were interested, initially. A major defense contractor cutting corners, soldiers getting hurt, a whistleblower with inside information. It was a good story. Until their lawyers got involved. We can't publish this without more evidence, the reporter told me, apologetic but firm. Your father could sue us for defamation. Everything you've told us is either unprovable or technically legal. We need documentation, recordings, witnesses willing to go on record. I'm going on record. You're his son. Your testimony alone isn't enough, especially when it's about a conversation no one else heard. I believe you, but belief isn't enough to run a story that could destroy a major company. I tried going to my chain of command, filed a formal complaint, requested an investigation into PDS's contract practices. The request went up the chain and disappeared. A month later, I got unofficial word that I should drop it. PDS had too many important contracts, too many connections, too many people in the DoD who'd made their careers working with the company. Pick your battles, Sergeant, my CO told me, off the record. Some mountains are too big to move. I spent 3 months trying every avenue I could think of.
congressional representatives, inspector general complaints, military ethics boards. Nothing worked. My father had been careful. Everything he'd done was technically defensible. The system wasn't built to catch what he'd done, because what he'd done existed in a gray area between negligence and malice. He'd taught me the lesson he wanted to teach, that the system protects money more than it protects soldiers, and there was nothing I could do about it. My mother called in June. "Your father tells me you two had a disagreement." A disagreement? Like we'd argued about politics over dinner? "Mom, did you know? About the equipment?" "I know your father runs his company according to military specifications," she said carefully. "I know he's very good at what he does." "That's not what I asked." A long silence. "Your father believes in teaching through experience. He always has. When you were young and didn't believe the stove was hot, he let you touch it, just briefly, just enough to learn. He says this is the same thing." "Morrison is gone, Mom. Chen almost didn't make it. That's not the same as touching a hot stove." "I know," she said quietly. "But your father, he thinks long-term. He thinks about what lessons matter. He thinks—" "I don't care what he thinks. He used my unit as a teaching tool." "Yes," she said, "he did." At least she was honest. "I can't forgive this, Mom." "I know," she said again. "Neither can I, really. But he's my husband, and he's your father, and that complicates things." "Not for me, it doesn't." I hung up. Haven't spoken to either of them since. I separated from the Army in September 2023. Honorable discharge, good service record, recommendations for civilian employment if I wanted them. My CO pulled me aside on my last day. "You did the right thing trying to report what happened," he said, "even though it didn't work out the way you wanted." Did I? Morrison is still gone. PDS still has their contracts. Nothing changed. "You tried. That matters." I wanted to believe him. Here's what happened after I left. I spent 3 months sending copies of everything I had to every journalist, every investigator, every member of Congress who might listen. Most didn't respond. The ones who did gave me variations of the same answer. Not enough evidence, too legally complex, too risky to pursue. But one reporter followed up. Small outlet, mostly online, but serious. She spent 4 months investigating, talked to other soldiers from units that used PDS equipment, examined contract records, built a statistical case showing that PDS-supplied equipment had failure rates 40% higher than the industry average. The story ran in January 2024. It made a small splash. A few congressional inquiries, some questions directed at the DoD about contract oversight. Peterson Defense Solutions issued a statement denying any wrongdoing and promising to review their quality control procedures. 3 months later, PDS won a new contract worth $600 million. The system protects money more than it protects soldiers. My father had been right about that. I'm working as a logistics consultant now, civilian side. I help companies optimize their supply chains, improve their quality control, identify inefficiencies. I'm very good at it. I'm also very careful about which companies I work with. I vet their practices thoroughly, I check their testing protocols, I make sure they're not cutting corners where it matters. And I never, ever work with defense contractors. Some people have called me a whistleblower. Others have called me a disgruntled former employee with an axe to grind against his father's company. Neither description feels accurate. I'm just someone who learned that the cost of war isn't paid equally, that some people profit while others pay with their lives, that the system is designed to protect those profits even when protecting them costs more soldiers their lives than enemy fire does. My father wanted to teach me about the reality of war. Mission accomplished, Dad. I drive past PDS headquarters sometimes. Can't help it. It's in downtown Denver, hard to avoid. The building looks exactly the same, the logo looks exactly the same, the business continues exactly as it always has. Morrison's father sent me a letter last year. Short, simple. Just wanted me to know that Jake's fishing boat, the one he'd always talked about, his father bought it anyway. named it Morrison's Dream. Takes it out every weekend, even though he doesn't much like fishing. Just feels like the right thing to do, he wrote. Keep some part of that dream alive. I sent a letter back, told him I was sorry, told him what really happened, or at least as much as I could prove. Told him about my father, about the equipment, about the lesson. He never responded. I don't blame him.
There's a question people ask sometimes when they hear some version of this story, usually missing key details, because I'm careful about what I share. They ask, was it worth it? Serving? Knowing what you know now? I don't have a good answer. I believe in service. I believe in the soldiers I served with, in the bonds we formed, in the mission we tried to accomplish. I believe Chen and Martinez and Morrison and all the others were genuinely trying to do something that mattered. But I also know that while we were trying to do something that mattered, my father was turning our service into profit margins. That every piece of defective equipment represented a calculation, how much could be saved versus how much risk was acceptable. That soldiers' lives were factored into spreadsheets as acceptable losses as long as the failure rates stayed within certain parameters. I learned that there are two wars happening simultaneously, the one soldiers fight in the field, and the one fought in boardrooms and contract negotiations, where different rules apply and different people profit. My father wanted me to understand both wars. I understand them now. I just wish I didn't. I haven't spoken to my father in over 1.5 years. My mother sends occasional texts, updates about family, holidays, minor news. She never asks me to reconcile. She knows better. Last month, she sent me an article. PDS had won another major contract. This one was for $900 million. The article praised the company's efficiency, their ability to deliver under budget, their strong relationship with the DoD. She didn't include any message with the article. She didn't need to. Sometimes I wonder if Morrison would have forgiven me, if I'd told him the truth, that the equipment keeping us safe was compromised, that my father's company was cutting corners, that we were unknowingly part of someone's business model. Would he have understood? Would any of them? Or would they have done what I did, believed that the system, despite its flaws, ultimately protected the people who served it? I learned the truth. That was what my father wanted. But here's what he didn't count on. I learned something else too. I learned that some lessons aren't worth the cost of teaching them. That there are truths that don't set you free, they just give you something heavy to carry for the rest of your life. That turning your son's service into an educational opportunity makes you something worse than negligent. It makes you a monster who loves his son enough to ruin him just to prove a point. I had dinner with Chen last month. He's out now too, working construction in California. We talked about the old days, carefully avoiding certain topics. Eventually, though, we couldn't avoid it anymore. "You ever talk to your dad?" he asked. "No." "Good," he said. "Some bridges should stay burned." We drank to that. Later, as we were leaving, he stopped me. "You know it wasn't your fault, right? Morrison, the equipment, all of it?" "I know." "But do you, though?" I didn't answer. "Your father made choices," Chen said. "You didn't. You tried to fix it. You tried everything you could. That matters." "Morrison's still gone." "Yeah," Chen agreed. "He is. But that's on your father, not you. Don't carry weight that isn't yours." I'm trying not to. Some days are easier than others. There's a box in my closet. Inside are Morrison's letters home. His family sent them to me after he passed, thought I might want them. Letters about fishing, about his plans for the future, about how proud he was to serve, how much he trusted his equipment, how safe he felt knowing the military wouldn't send them out with anything less than the best. I haven't opened that box in 6 months. I'm not sure I ever will again. My father sent me an email last week. First contact since our confrontation in his office. "I hope you've learned what you needed to learn. I hope you understand now why I did what I did. The world isn't simple. War isn't simple. Sometimes the only way to teach someone the truth is to make them live it. I'm proud of your service. I'm proud of the man you've become. And yes, I'm proud of what I built, even if you can't see it that way yet. Maybe someday you will. Love, Dad. I read it 3 times. Then I deleted it. Here's what I want you to understand. My father isn't a cartoon villain. He's not cackling in a tower somewhere, delighting in soldiers' suffering. He genuinely believes he taught me something important. He genuinely believes that understanding the reality of how war works, who profits, who pays, how the system really functions, is valuable knowledge that will serve me well in life. He's not wrong about that last part. I do understand now. I understand exactly how the machine works. I understand where the money flows and where the costs land. But understanding something and accepting it aren't the same thing. My father accepted it, built a career on it, built a fortune on it. I can't. There's a memorial at Fort Riley, a stone wall with names of soldiers from our battalion who didn't make it home. Morrison's name is there, 3rd row, 4th from the left. I visit when I'm in Kansas. Stand there for a few minutes. Don't pray. I'm not sure what I'd say. Just stand there. Sometimes other people are there too. Family members, fellow soldiers, people paying respects. I never tell them my name, never tell them my connection to Morrison or to any of this. Just another veteran visiting another memorial. That's how it should be.
The last time I saw my father in person was at that meeting in his office. The last thing he said to me as I was leaving, papers scattered on his expensive carpet, was this: "You'll understand eventually. You'll see that this was the only way to teach you something real." Maybe he's right. Maybe I will understand someday, see it from his perspective, accept that the lesson was more important than the cost. But I don't think so. Because here's what I learned, what I really learned. Some truths aren't worth knowing if the price is other people's lives. Some lessons aren't worth teaching if you have to hurt people to prove your point. And some relationships can't survive learning that the person you trusted most thinks of soldiers as objects in a spreadsheet rather than human beings with families and dreams and fishing boats they'll never buy. My father taught me about the cost of war, but he didn't teach me what he thought he was teaching. He taught me that sometimes the monsters aren't in the desert wearing enemy uniforms. Sometimes they're in boardrooms wearing expensive suits. Sometimes they're your father. I got a wedding invitation last month. Martinez, the guy whose body armor cracked during training. He's marrying his high school sweetheart, finally took the plunge after getting out. The invitation included a note. Would mean a lot if you could make it, bringing the whole unit back together. Well, most of it. Most of it. Not all of it. Never all of it again. I RSVP'd yes, sent a generous gift. I'll be there in 2 months, standing with the guys who made it through. We'll drink too much, tell the same stories we always tell, carefully edit out the parts that still hurt too much to talk about. And we won't talk about why some of us aren't there. We never do. There's a question I ask myself sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep. If I'd known what my father was doing from the beginning, if I'd somehow figured it out during deployment, could I have stopped it? Could I have saved Morrison? The answer is probably no. I had no authority, no access, no way to change the supply chain. Even knowing what I know now, with all the evidence I gathered, I couldn't make anything happen. What could I have done as a sergeant in the field? But probably no isn't the same as definitely no, and that difference keeps me awake sometimes. Chen called me last night, drunk, which is unusual for him. "Do you ever wonder," he said, "if we should have seen it coming? All those failures, all those close calls? Should we have known something was wrong?" We did know something was wrong. We reported it. But did we push hard enough? Did we make enough noise? Chen, we did everything we could within the system. The system failed us. Yeah, I know. Morrison was 20 years old, man. 20. And we're sitting here having this conversation because your dad wanted to teach you a lesson about capitalism. I know. That's so messed up. That's so incredibly messed up. I know. We sat in silence on the phone for a while. Sometimes that's all you can do. You doing okay? I finally asked. Most days, he said. You? Most days. That's something, I guess. Yeah, that's something. I've thought about writing a book, getting everything down on paper, all the details, all the evidence, all of it, making sure the story gets out there in a way that can't be ignored or dismissed. But here's the thing. I've read enough whistleblower stories to know how they end. The person who speaks out becomes the story, not the thing they're speaking out about. Their credibility gets attacked, their motives get questioned, their family relationships get dissected in public. And at the end of it all, the system they're fighting changes incrementally, if at all. I exposed what my father did. I gave everything I had to investigators and journalists and anyone who would listen. And Peterson Defense Solutions just won a $900 million contract. So what would a book accomplish, really, except turning my pain into entertainment for people who read it once and move on? Maybe that's cynical. Maybe that's the exhaustion talking. Or maybe it's just realistic. My sister called a few months ago. We hadn't spoken in a year. She'd taken my father's side in all of this, said I was being dramatic, that I didn't understand business. Dad had a health scare, heart thing. He's okay now, but it was scary for a while. I'm glad he's okay. That's it? That's all you have to say? What do you want me to say, Jennifer? He's our father. He made mistakes, sure, but he deliberately sent defective equipment to my unit, knowing it would likely result in casualties. That's not a mistake. That's a choice. He was trying to teach you something. Yeah, he succeeded. I learned that my father values a lesson more than he values soldiers' lives. Lesson received. She was quiet for a moment. You used to be less angry. I used to not know what my father was capable of. He loves you, Marcus. I know. That's almost the worst part. He loves me enough to get soldiers hurt just to prove a point. What does that say about his love? She didn't have an answer for that. Neither do I, really. Here's something I haven't told anyone. I applied to work for the DoD Inspector General's office. They're the ones who investigate fraud and abuse in defense contracting. They're the ones who could actually do something about companies like Peterson Defense Solutions. I have the credentials. I have the experience. I have the motivation. I got turned down. The rejection letter was professional, polite. We've decided to pursue other candidates whose backgrounds better aligned with our current needs. I found out later, through a contact, that my application was flagged. Conflict of interest, family connection to a major contractor, potential bias. The system protecting itself again. Can't let someone with an axe to grind against their father's company into a position where they might actually be able to do something about it. I get it. I understand the logic. Doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. You know what the strangest part is? I still catch myself wanting to call him sometimes. When something happens, good or bad, doesn't matter. When I have a question about business or life or how to handle some complicated situation. Because for 30 years, that's who he was. The person you called. The person who had answers. The person who'd been through everything and could guide you through anything. That instinct doesn't just disappear because you learned something terrible about someone. The person who raised you is still the person who raised you, even when you discover they're capable of things you never imagined. I don't call, obviously, but I still think about it. And that's its own kind of loss. Martinez's wedding is in June. I bought my plane ticket yesterday. I'll see the guys. We'll celebrate. We'll remember the good times and carefully avoid the bad ones. We'll take pictures and make toasts and pretend for one weekend that everything turned out okay. And maybe in some ways it did. We survived. We made it home. We're building lives. That's more than Morrison got. More than his father got, really. He's out on that fishing boat every weekend, keeping a dream alive for a son who's gone. I think about that sometimes. About what it means to keep going when the thing you were living for doesn't exist anymore. I don't have an answer, but I keep going anyway. We all do. Last thing, and then I'm done. There's a framed photo on my desk. Group photo from our deployment, taken about 3 weeks before we lost Morrison. Everyone's smiling, exhausted but happy. Young men who thought they understood what they'd signed up for. Morrison is in the front row, that huge grin of his, probably talking about that fishing boat again. I look at that photo every day. Not to torture myself, not to wallow in guilt or anger, but to remember. To remember that behind every contract and every cost-saving measure and every acceptable failure rate, there are actual people. Real people with families and dreams and futures that should have happened. To remember that when my father made his calculations, when he decided the lesson was worth the cost, he wasn't calculating with abstract numbers. He was calculating with Morrison's life, with Chen's safety, with every soldier in my unit. And he decided it was worth it. I'll never forgive that. But I'll never forget it either. If you're still listening, thank you. I know this isn't the kind of story that ends with everything tied up neatly. There's no justice here, no real resolution, just what happened and what it cost and what I'm left carrying. My father taught me about the cost of war, just not the way he intended. He taught me that sometimes the cost is paid by the people who can least afford it, that the system is designed to protect those at the top while those at the bottom absorb the consequences, that profit will almost always win over people because profit is measurable and people are expendable. He wanted me to accept that, to understand it and move on, make my peace with how things work. Instead, I learned that some things shouldn't be accepted, that understanding how a broken system works doesn't mean you have to make peace with it, that knowing the truth doesn't mean agreeing with it. My father made millions during the war. My brothers paid for it. That's the lesson. That's the cost. And I'll carry it for the rest of my life.